We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Take your own advice.
What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to the Antidote. This is Greg and Karen.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right, Jeremy, today we are going to be covering the recent story that just came out in the front page of The Nation magazine titled The President and the Spy. I believe the article is actually, or the candidate of the spy, I'm sorry. I believe the article is actually titled The Trump Campaign's Collusion with Israel. It's written by James Bamford, who is written more extensively about this particular topic in his new book. Book is called Spy War, correct?
It's called Spyfail, Foreign Spies, Moles, Saboteurs, and the Collapse of America's Counterintelligence.
Okay, so this is a not exactly an extended excerpt, but elements of a bigger theme in the book that was condensed for the Nation magazine cover story, and it gets into collusion between the Trump campaign via particularly Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi, and elements in Israel closely connected to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in particular, confidant of Netanyahu's. So we're going to get into this, some of the outline of like the basics of the article and what it's laying out and arguing, and then some of the issues that we found with it, which we alluded to a little bit in one of our recent shows regarding James Bamford's book Spyfail, and for example, the way the case of Maria Butina is covered in the book. But we'll get into that. We'll have a discussion about this. We'll also bring in some of conversation about Bamford's take on Christopher Steele, who put together the Steele dossier, and then also some reading from Seth Abramson's Proof of Conspiracy. So let's get into it with the Candidate and the Spy by James Bamford in the Nation magazine, which has created a decent amount of waves. I'd like to see more people actually tackle this topic and deal with like what he gets right and what is left out. But we'll see how that goes going forward. But that's what we're here for at the Antidote. So let's get into it.
Yes, and the timing couldn't be more important, with the focus being on what's being said to be finally journalistic proof of the Netanyahu component of what we call the 11/9 operation, and that is now obviously still in full fruition in terms of what's going on in Israel, with Netanyahu facing what's being called by high-level security officers and former heads of intelligence and military commanders as the most serious security threat to the state of Israel since, I believe, the 6-Day War. I think that was one quote that I saw, and this is all about Netanyahu's apparent attack on the judiciary, or the politicization of the judiciary in Israel, and massive protests and storming outside of the prime minister's residence, where he had to flee. And so this, I think we see this as part of the ongoing 11/9 operation in many ways. And this, you could see this in certain ways as Trump on steroids, is what we're seeing Netanyahu doing. Now, Trump tried to do some of this, obviously, tried to abuse the judicial system, installed tons of his own judges. Many of them then wash out in terms of totally obvious deficient takes on even judicial push to hold Trump accountable for his obvious crimes. And of course, this is what's front and center around Netanyahu right now, is that he is similar to past leaders in Israel, is under investigation and under indictment for political corruption charges. But what's different this time is it looks like he is the first one. Netanyahu is the first Israeli leader to attempt to actually try to overthrow the judiciary in relationship to this. And Netanyahu then claims that this is not about his own predicament, and that these are false charges, fake news, politicized prosecutors, the whole kind of slew of things that we're hearing right now from Trump in relationship to the whole series of different state level, New York level investigations, criminal investigations into him, but also federal investigations into him in regard to conspiracy, it looks like, in relationship to the January 6th operation, and then these documents and how that might have all fit together. And Netanyahu is doing similar things to Trump of trying to wave that away with his hand. So the understanding of this moment, I believe you have to have some context in relationship to the actual 11/9 operation. And while Bamford, as we'll get into here, is exposing and further journalistically laying out some of the key forensics of how specific, how high level the Netanyahu Israeli involvement in the 11/9 operation was, at the very same time he's dissembling and a key voice in obscuring the actual transnational aspects of the 11/9 operation. You'll see that he tries to minimize what was actually found in relationship to Trump-Russia, quote unquote, collusion by everyone from the Mueller report to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, Volume 5 on the counterintelligence parts of it, while running this very similar line that we hear from everyone from like Oliver Stone to people like Ryan Dawson to even someone like Noam Chomsky in relationship to this was not Russia. Sure, maybe they did some Facebook ads or something like that. Maybe they hacked some emails and stuff like that. But Israel, AIPAC, all the things that people paying attention, especially in the United States, know very, very well for decades and decades and decades in terms of the power of the Israeli state and its extension, the Israel lobby in the United States, in terms of our domestic politics. But meanwhile, I would say there's a parallel operation to what Bamford himself on Democracy Now! 15 years ago actually did in relationship to the 9/11 cover-up, where he exposed some crucial things around the Israeli technology firms that we've covered in recent episodes, especially Narus and Verint. We may touch back on to that specifically, while then further obscuring the actual source of the 9/11 operation itself. So I think we're in a parallel kind of situation right now with the 11/9 operation. And so we'll get into this and we'll see, we'll tie some specifics down here and point out exactly how the narrative is being manipulated, I think, by Bamford and Amy Goodman. And then this will then, of course, then be taken up by all these previously mentioned kind of networks of people who look to Oliver Stone or Ryan Dawson or Noam Chomsky for their analysis. This is a major part of narrative warfare going on that means to obscure the actual nature and reasons for the 11/9 operation and the fact we're still in the throes of it in many ways.
I agree with you, and it's important to be able to take both the positives out of, and I think we talked about a potential positive of this is that there's going to be more of a discussion, like in some circles, about like the nature of the almost like the third rail of some level or another of like the influence of lobby and all this, and the question of Israel and Obama, and like why would specific elements have this interest in like in Trump once he's confirmed to be this nominee? Because the timeline that Bamford lays out is May through the fall of 2016. That's pretty much May is when it was clear that Donald Trump was going to be the Republican candidate up into the fall. And the question becomes, well, why? Why is not only Obama, but also seemed to be against a Clinton administration coming in and so preferable to this particular person? So this helps to ask the questions about that. And I think that's a positive. And I also think the forensics, it makes sense. The narrative, it's sensible and logical and there's continuity and with the names, with the Stone and with Corsi. And we ran into stuff about Stone and Corsi in Jerusalem. I believe it might have been Haaretz or one of the Israeli papers back in 2019, I want to say. And this is adding on more specific, I think, forensics to something that was discussed a little bit, at least in some of the Israeli press. I forget which websites picked it up. I believe Haaretz might have picked this up at the time with Roger Stone and Jerome Corsi and contacts in Israel regarding 2016 and outreach. But this is more forensics with names involved and dates and places and locations, which I do think is a positive. I think the problem becomes, and that is exactly what you said, it is a form of narrative warfare, limiting the scope, which we've seen so much and so often from so many people that are about either downplaying as much as possible, or if not just outright dismissing any type of, Russiagate's a big hoax and nothing burger, or going back to the whole Van Jones thing and that nothing happened. And anybody who's talking about this is a Russophobe who wants to go to World War III with Russia. And so obviously The Nation, which is the publication that promoted and was the primary, I believe, space for Professor Stephen F. Cohen and the preeminent Russia-friendly academic scholar, I believe, out of Princeton, who passed away recently, and his wife, his widow, is the publisher of The Nation. So, I mean, it makes sense in that regard that The Nation would publish this article where Bamford does make a point to not say that nothing happened with Russia, but to go back to, the Mueller report said that there was no conspiracy that could be made out of the...
No, he doesn't even say there was no conspiracy. He said that they were... We'll read it, but he basically says there was a no that gave that the Mueller team gave Russia a clean bill of health, I think is the way he said it. Or Trump
Right.
Russia, basically.
Yes, and the paraphrasing of the Mueller report found nothing that could make a provable case of anything of a provable serious case laid out of a serious foreign involvement from Russia. And so, yeah, you're exactly right, Jeremy. And so that's where I think the shortcoming, one of the shortcomings of this is, and then you take that in with the work that Bamford does in the book Spyfail to dismiss the case of Maria Butina, for example, also in his book, and another portion of the bigger book, Spyfail. And you can really see where the negatives and the problems and what you mentioned with the narrative warfare and the limiting of the scope and just trying to separate Israel from other elements of this bigger 2016 operation. As we've talked about, people like Seth Abramson have done a really good job of the laying out the forensics on multiple scale of international complicity. And Bamford is just taking this and trying to a combination of this focus on this these meetings with Stone and Corsi, which is important to understand, of course. It's very important to the bigger operation. But then the dismissal of and the way that Maria Butina is framed in the book Spyfail, and this comment of the distinguishing of, everybody focused on Russia, but here's what was found in Israel. This separating of the players in there, and through giving some decent information that is important to understand. Some pieces of the puzzle also, it's removing other pieces of the puzzle that are equally critical to understand in terms to get a full picture of what happened. And that is what Bamford and The Nation magazine and people like Amy Goodman were effectively doing through this article and then through this interview that he did on Democracy Now! That we were referring to.
Yes, and I'd say that there's three main pieces of obfuscation that Bamford is accomplishing in relationship to both this book and this article and the media appearances surrounding it. And now I won't say that he's doing disinformation because I'm not clear about his intent per se, but I would say that all of this is misinformation, and it's all helps to obscure three crucial things. First and foremost is what you begin to hint at there, Greg, in terms of that he is attempting to dissemble the 11/9 operation by saying, okay, Russia, but Israel's the real one who did the 2016 election interference. So in certain ways, this is very similar to those who might, in terms of 9/11, point to one of the national players, for example, in terms of, okay, this was Saudi Arabia, rather than the United States or something like that, or this is Saudi Arabia rather than Israel, and in so doing, actually help obfuscate the high level geopolitics and actual originators and architects of the operation in certain ways by obscuring the larger operation. So that's the main thing that I see happening. Subsidiary to that, or subsequent to that, you will see Bamford does two main other pieces of dissembling that I believe actually serve that prime operative, it looks like, in terms of obscuring the 11/9 operation in its larger scope. One is what we referenced before, is that he, at the very least, in the language that's he uses in terms of this appearance and in the sort of the front line, the top line of his article and his books, is attempting to say that there was no mention of any of this in the Mueller report or the Senate Select Committee intelligence report, so that the investigators didn't say any of this. Now, we'll point out that this is not true. We'll first of all actually distinguish what Bamford says to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! Around what the Mueller report actually found from what it actually said, and what the legal terminology is related to. But then Bamford also seems to be saying that there was no hint of this in the media at all. And I would just point out, okay, for the AnteDote, are we the media? Probably not. We don't proclaim to be journalists. We're not writers. We don't do long form investigative journalism written out and then published and all of that. But we are public analysts, and we are part of the press, we the people's press, to some extent, right? And we were picking up on this whole line in terms of where this led. For example, Corsi and Stone. Just from paying attention to what was going on InfoWars during the 2016 campaign, and then during the transition, and then in the early days of the Trump days, we already had identified that Corsi was on air on InfoWars, right? This is the year 2016 that Alex Jones brought in Roger Stone, basically to be a co-commander in the 11/9 operation. And Corsi was on air on InfoWars talking about he's in contact with Israeli intelligence above Mossad. All right, we pointed that out and continued to evolve the analysis surrounding that. 2016, 2017. You even get to a point in 2018 where if you do search terms like in Google for things like Eric Prince, Israel, or Michael Flynn, Israel, and AnteDote episodes on YouTube are some of the highest ranking results in terms of those inquiries. Okay, so these are key players, obviously, in the 11/9 operation. Everyone from Roger Stone to Jerome Corsi to Michael Flynn to Eric Prince. And meanwhile, we the people press, some of us here at the AnteDote, we were on this. Now, I would say that in a certain way, we actually, our starting position was probably way too heavily dismissive of the Russian component of the 11/9 operation. But we saw exactly the scope of how high and how deep the Israeli and specifically Netanyahu part of the 11/9 operation went. And we pointed it out, and we covered it and covered it and covered it. All right. So it's very dismissive of Bamford. And I would say it's actually obscuring the actual historical record here for Bamford to say that none of this came out in the media. And then more and more actually came out of in actually mainstream media around this, enough so that someone like Seth Abramson wrote a book that goes way bigger scope in terms of Israel and the 11/9 operation, than Bamford does. And Abramson published this before the Senate Select Committee and Intelligence Volume 5 Counterintelligence Report even came out, published in earlier 2019, Proof of Conspiracy, that has Netanyahu on the cover alongside Trump and Putin and the MBZ and MBS. All right. And I did an interview on American Community Radio in Kansas City, KKFI, in the fall of or maybe late summer of 2020, covering Proof of Conspiracy, and then what we then learned from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Volume 5 report in relationship to bolstering Abramson's hypothesis of the Red Sea conspiracy and how the geopolitics worked together in relationship to Trump-Russia, not in contradiction to Trump-Russia. All right, and this is New York Times bestsellers. He used, now there's lots of reasons to critique Abramson. We've done our own criticism of what's not there in Abramson's work and certain problems with it, but for Bamford to say that the media didn't pick up on any of this and said nothing about it when you have this New York Times bestseller book about it, quoting mainstream media sources and the Mueller report and media from all around the world, including media that pays attention to Israel-Palestine, there's something wrong here in terms of how wrong Bamford is in his top line assessments of both the government investigation into this and what it said, and then also what he says that the media said and didn't say. Now, all of that does not disparage the important core of the forensics and the journalism, as we pointed out before. And properly seen, Bamford's work in this question of Netanyahu in 11/9, and as I pointed out before, there's a whole chunk on Milchan, and not on 11/9, but Milchan's deeper role as a long-term high-level Israeli intelligence officer, agent of some sort, in terms of the United States specifically. So there's a lot here that if all of that is then fit into a larger schema and a proper understanding that's really fully honest about what actually was said and done, then this could be a very helpful, constructive addition to the public knowledge and the public interest. But if this is all done then to just sort of say, see, all those Ryan Dawson types were correct, this is, Russia, this is all about Israel, then we are sort of left even more blind than we were, before this, I would say. So this is why we think this is really, really important, especially of this. This is the most escalated moment in terms of the question of Trump and Netanyahu and the question of justice and the push towards autocracy and the alignment with this larger transnational, the internationalist autocratic movement that, yes, goes into the highest levels of the Kremlin too. And this can all be proven out and has been proven out. Now we have these more details, and that's good. But now should we get into the Democracy Now! Appearance?
Yeah, let's do that. And I was just going to say a quick follow-up to what you pointed out there about the our work at the AnteDote in terms of like putting together some of the forensics and really having like an understanding almost from the beginning of like Israel and Trump before we started putting the Russian factor together. And that was through things like analyzing the Alex Jones show and also analyzing Jerome Corsi back when he was still decoding QAnon posts before he turned against QAnon, and he was stating that Israeli sources intelligence above Mossad had wanted to organize, I think it was Trump and Kissinger, to remake the Middle East and to geopolitically shift things away from Obama's destructive policy. So I mean, like that was that's interesting. And then you combine that with somebody like Abramson, who goes to he's not going to InfoWars or Jerome Corsi's YouTube streams, but he is getting forensics together from quote unquote mainstream sources that are putting a bigger geopolitical picture together. So you put all of that together, and I think it creates effective. And what we tried to do is try to take the best of all of these as much as we can here, and try to make as much of a case as possible for what happened and what has happened since then, and put it into as clear of a picture as we possibly can. And that's why you mentioned the escalation in Israel right now with this probably unprecedented, it seems, protests going on, and the overhauling and the top defense aide to Netanyahu. You said maybe it would be like the equivalent of like the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff just quitting because he didn't want to work with the sitting president anymore. And these shakeups taking place, these mass protests, and then also the escalation in terms of like the Russia-friendly narratives that are out there, where not only now is like it's escalated so much to the point where you have people who believe things all the way from Russia is fighting Ukraine to stop World War III, all the way to Russia is fighting Ukraine to end child trafficking because Ukrainian children are being trafficked, or Russian children are being trafficked, or children are being trafficked through Ukraine, and all this and all this stuff. So I mean, and then Putin's literally like a savior of the world at this point in some people's eyes. And so these escalations in Israel with what's going on, the escalation in terms of like what people believe about Russia, like it's important, increasingly important as time goes on, to get a full picture as much as possible, and not to obfuscate and leave out these details or leave out these elements, and just get all of the information as much as possible, lay it out there, and connect how all of these entities were directly involved in what took place in 2016 and what has taken place since, and why it matters, because it's continuing to have an effect on the current moment and everything going forward, both domestically in our countries and geopolitically and globally.
And I would point out that how stunning it is that just yesterday on InfoWars, on their Sunday broadcast, Alex Jones specifically had on Roger Stone. He said that at the last moment, he said we need to have on Roger Stone to deal with the Trump rally and DeSantis and all of this. And Roger Stone is at the epicenter of this story of Bamford's publishing in The Nation, and it's Stone's text messages that were released by the FBI that nailed down that this goes right into the Prime Minister's office under the nomenclature of PM, right? And so this was not mentioned, of course. They're not going to mention this aspect of Netanyahu and Trump being connected from way back in terms of that. Or they could have made some kind of parallel analogy of the deep state attacking these two leaders together. That's why they work together or something like that. But their mum was totally the word on this big revelation about Roger Stone and the highest levels of Israeli intelligence above Mossad, as Corsi said on InfoWars airwaves. Okay, so there's a lot there, because then you would then have to point out too that InfoWars is a crucial place that seems to be replicating some kind of line, maybe a harsher line than Bamford's, but in the same realm in terms of narrative warfare as Bamford, playing down the role of the Kremlin and Putin. There's actually many Putin apologists directly on there, from like Barnes, his favorite legal go-to guy. Robert, is his name Robert Barnes, Greg?
Yes, Robert Barnes.
He was on there in recent days, basically repeating the line exactly of what you just said, Greg, in terms of that Putin and Putin's Russia are leading the world's pushback against the woke globo homo type agenda and all that kind of thing.
Interestingly, Barnes and Jones were pushing the best of both worlds on these narratives, that about Russia, and then also even pushing that Trump and Alan Dershowitz were unfairly targeted as Epstein clients, and leaving out the real Epstein criminal complicit elements.
Everyone was guilty about under Epstein except for Donald Trump and Alan Dershowitz. And of course, in so doing, they point out that thing that we pointed out over and over again about Dershowitz's defense being, I was misidentified as the former CTO of Microsoft, Nathan Myhrvold. They don't mention who that name at all, because that would then, of course, tie directly back to Israel. Right. And Dershowitz is now recently went on Kim Iverson's show, and she's sort of seen as, asking him the hard questions on Epstein. And Dershowitz basically says, I've been involved or working for Israel since before you were born. Right. And so none of this seems to percolate, even though the narratives around the 11/9 operation and Russia specifically seem to be very similar in these networks, but none of this information seems to interpercolate in terms of the ongoing narrative warfare to cover up the 11/9 operation. And then finally, before we get into the actual words of Bamford and Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, I want to point out that this is then there's a replication of exactly what we're talking about in terms of Bamford's book Spyfail, where the final section, he calls it Book 9, is about the quote unquote the fearmongers, which is all about talking about how the Russian component was overblown. And as you pointed out, involves saying Butina was just a scapegoat rather than what we would probably see as a mid-level operative in the much longer term infiltration and working, especially of the culture war aspects of massaging the GOP into the 11/9 Trump operation ultimately, via things such as the NRA and the trips to Moscow, and then the big payoff in relationship to the Center for the National Interest and the Mayflower Hotel speech that Trump gave, and all of those networks. So I just want to point that out, that's the big payload in terms of the last piece that Bamford leaves you with is fear mongers. And I believe that is, and I haven't read that whole section, but read some of the same Butina section that you have, Greg. And it's clear that Bamford's intent in that is to wave the hands around an overblown question around Russian involvement, I think.
And it was interesting that Bamford pinpointed someone who's actually like a Roger Stone ally. Patrick Byrne of Overstock.com is the paranoid, creating this paranoia around Butina. Anyway, I mean I just found that interesting that somebody who he uses as the person to show that this was all just a unreasonable witch hunt against this idealistic young Russian woman in America living in the United States, that it was actually a Stone associate and ally who was used as the person who was the villain in terms of the person who caused all of this hysteria, as he puts it, about Butina. So I just thought that was interesting.
Yes, definitely. All right, let's get into the Democracy Now! Transcript of the March 24th appearance by James Bamford, titled "The Candidate and the Spy, James Bamford on Israel's Secret Collusion with Trump to Win 2016 Race." And we'll include the link to this in our notes. And I'm just going to we've described the larger setup of this, and so I just want to get straight into Amy Goodman's framing of this. All right. Amy Goodman, quote, "This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As mass protests rock Israel against the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his plan to overhaul Israel's judiciary, we turn now to look at how Netanyahu secretly tried to help Donald Trump win the 2016 election. That's the focus of a new cover story in The Nation headlined "The Candidate and the Spy." Longtime award-winning investigative journalist James Bamford reveals Netanyahu dispatched a secret Israeli agent to the United States in the spring of 2016 to meet with advisors to Trump and offer to share secret intelligence with the campaign against Hillary Clinton. The story is based in part on a series of text messages sent by the Israeli secret agent to Trump advisor Roger Stone. In one message from August 12, 2016, the agent wrote, quote, "Roger, hello from Jerusalem. Any progress? He is going to be defeated unless we intervene. We have critical intel. The key is in your hands, unquote, the text read. Later, the agent wrote, quote, October surprise is coming, unquote. A full unquote here. Now, I think that, what's interesting is that if Bamford is correct about Isaac Malcho being this key long-term Netanyahu agent and ally, being the one who is in communications here, I think that it would be interesting to suppose that this is who Jerome Corsi was getting text messages from live on InfoWars airwaves. I think that is a legitimate speculation, and so that makes it interesting. So again, appreciate the additional forensics and deep dive journalism in terms of Bamford, as I did back 15 years ago in terms of his laying out the NSA and Israeli intelligence relationship, especially escalated after 9/11. But as then, we'll point out that there is a problem here with Bamford in terms of the cover-up of the operation itself, 9/11 and now 11/9. All right, back to the transcript of Democracy Now! And James Bamford. Quote, James Bamford writes, quote, while the American media and political system fixated on Russian President Vladimir Putin and his armies of cyber warriors, trolls, and bots, what was completely missed in the Russiagate investigation of 2016 was the Israeli connection. No details of it were ever revealed in the heavily redacted Mueller report, unquote, or in the Senate Intelligence Committee report. James Bamford joins us now from Washington, D.C., author of many books. His latest, Spyfail, Foreign Spies, Mole, Saboteurs, and the Collapse of America's Counterintelligence. Okay, unquote. I just want to point out one other additional piece that I think I want to point out in terms of I've said that the main thing that this Bamford narrative is doing is obscuring the 11/9 operation in depth and scope. All right, that's definitely the one piece. In so doing, he then obscures the actual evidence that already was made public via the government and investigators from the Mueller to the Senate Intelligence Committee and then also the quote unquote media. All right. So, but there's a fourth piece here that's also, I believe, a key subsidiary of the overarching attempt to obscure the 11/9 operation. And this is what we pointed out even when we were dealing with like Trump Russia specifically in relationship to 11/9, that there is an attempt to limit the depth of how long all of this was going on. Right. So Bamford makes it seem as if that Netanyahu just sort of got an idea to help Trump out in 2016 or something like that. Just as we pointed out that many of the reportings around Trump Russia made it seem like there was just sort of Putin got an idea to sort of help, his favorite candidate Trump over Hillary Clinton sometime in the run up to the election. Rather than, of course, the decades-long cultivation of Trump as an asset, obviously most obviously via his role as an apparent money launderer in place, whether knowing or unknowing of key elements of the global Russian organized crime syndicate, where even leaders of the mob were living in Trump Tower. And that goes back decades and decades and decades, and additionally, the question of trips to Moscow and these much deeper relations. Now, the same thing exists here in terms of Trump Netanyahu. Even Netanyahu seems to try to limit the scope of his obvious relationship with Trump. I saw in Piers Morgan's recent interview with Netanyahu that was mainly about what's going on in Israel right now, that Netanyahu was focusing on his 40-year relationship with Joe Biden, which is very obviously true. But as we pointed out, that Netanyahu was in New York City as the UN representative for Israel in the 80s, this key era of both Russian and Israeli intelligence operations, with the Pollard operation being maybe the most obvious example of all of that. But that's when Netanyahu got into the networks with Trump. So that's also 40 years. But Netanyahu doesn't even say that I've known Trump for 40 years. He has known Trump for 40 years. And he's also known Trump's son-in-law since he was a boy, Kushner, right? And this is all then covered up in scope in terms of this all sort of came to fruition with a worried Netanyahu. Now, I'm not saying, as we've covered over and over again, that Netanyahu, even in his own words and some of these articles that were even in Israel, that Netanyahu was under extra pressure during the last Obama year in terms of Obama's attempts to escalate some pressure on Israel to resolve the so-called Israel-Palestine conflict, right? But a lot of this is much, much, much deeper in time, right? And this is why we were able to very accurately analyze the Israeli intent and specifically the Netanyahu intent behind Trump, even just going back to 2015 and Trump's first spoken reason for getting into the presidential election was the Iran deal, right? And then of course this is that key moment, right? And I'm not sure Bamford deals with any of this, which would be crucial because it's sort of the immediate precursor to what he's covering in terms of the escalation of Roger Stone, Jerome Corsi, and Malho in relationship to Netanyahu's aid towards Trump and the Trump campaign. But 2015, Netanyahu storms the U.S. Congress to try to defeat the Iran deal. And then Netanyahu, in his own words, people really should listen to maybe even re-listen to our recent episodes about Netanyahu's own autobiography in terms of what's disclosed in terms of a timeline here. That then immediately thereafter is when he says that these key 11-9 operators, these 11-9 high-level operatives, such as Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, but the highest levels of both the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabian government seek him out. And he basically admits to the yacht meeting that Seth Abramson, for a long time picking out of mainstream media reporting on it, has called the Red Sea conspiracy. And so that's just 1 year earlier. So you could pick out of media investigations and just Trump's words on the record and the context of all of that, exactly what Netanyahu was interested in and what he was doing in relationship to the 11-9 operation. I'll just point out too that such individuals as Arthur Finkelstein are not even indexed as being mentioned in Bamford's book. Crucial character to understand this whole network, obviously. Another character who's not mentioned, if you were going to bring up Finkelstein in terms of the key Netanyahu involvement there, Finkelstein having helped save Netanyahu, help install him politically in 1996, but also Finkelstein then being deeply involved in the Orban installation, is someone like Andi Vanya, who you would also then think with, over 50 pages about Arnon Milchan in this book would help draw out some of these more transnational interests in terms of this network. Andi Vanya being Arnon Milchan's probably best friend and being the right-hand man for the Arthur Finkelstein installed Orban government consolidating the media in Hungary. And now Orban, key front and center at CPAC, and the core of the Republican base at this point, the political base, it looks like, Orban and Tucker Carlson. So there's some really key missing elements that I would say also then suggest that this is exactly what Bamford's book operates to do in relationship to the 11-9 operation. More in broader scope, is it just obscures it. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, back to Democracy Now! Transcript from March 24th, 2023. Quote, Jim, welcome back to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us. Take us on this journey. Talk about what happened, why we know a lot about Russia, or at least a lot is made of in going after Russia, saying it tried to overthrow the 2016 election or spin it for Trump. What actually is documented here is Israel's involvement, and yet Mueller report, Senate Intelligence Committee, it looks like they knew, but just didn't want to talk about it. Unquote. And this is where this final piece here, I think, is the really fair part about what Bamford and Amy Goodman are pointing out, is that it was in large scope covered up by the government, by the media. But I think the really helpful and accurate analysis is the one that we've been doing, which is saying that the Israeli involvement in 11/9, just as I would say the core apparent Israeli involvement in the architecture of 9/11 is used as a leverage point, as a key leverage point for the cover-up of the operation more generally, especially in the United States, where it's so obvious over decades and decades and decades how much power Israeli interests and the Israel lobby and the Israeli government and its agents in place and its serious, overwhelming power in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. media has. So this is a key piece, that it was obviously, the extent of it was covered up. So we're not denying that. We've been talking about that for years, for more than 5 years probably. You know, ever since 2018, when in the middle of 2018, if you Googled Flynn Israel, Prince Israel, the AnteDote would pop up, right? We've been talking about this element and how it was being covered up. But we've also talked about, since that time, about how it's actually used as a leverage point to help cover up the larger operation because of the sensitivity around Israel and the power of Israel in relationship to the United States. All right. All right, back to the transcript of Democracy Now!, March 24th with James Bamford. Okay, so Amy Goodman says, it looks like they knew but just didn't want to talk about it. I think that's true. James Bamford, quote, well, exactly. The documents I got are from the FBI. There are the FBI affidavit about this. There's documents, numerous quotes from the secret agent, the Israeli secret agent sent by Netanyahu, talking about the quote-unquote PM, which the FBI agent indicates was the prime minister, and lays out a months-long plot, basically from May of 2016 till the fall of 2016, right up to the election. This was investigated by the Mueller team. It was the Mueller team, the Mueller FBI agents, who actually got a search warrant for the secret agent's communications. And that's what these documents are. These are the basis of that investigation from the FBI and the Mueller team. But all this was redacted from the final Mueller report. All they focused on was Russia, and in the end, they basically gave Russia a bill of health. They said that there was no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Unquote. I just want to point out that the language that was actually, this is actually Bamford is replicating the disinformation that Bill Barr used to try to help Rod Rosenstein land the plane when the Mueller report actually came in. And the actual language that was used by the Mueller team was that they could not establish a conspiracy in relationship between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, while saying that they had not either on the sort of the first part, which was about collusion, which is not a legal term. That's sort of more like a counterintelligence or a public interest term. That was the first half of the Mueller report, was about quote unquote Trump-Russia collusion. But being that it was a legal investigation, it's a special counsel looking to, make indictments if indictments are the proper way forward, which they did make some. That was then said that they could not establish a conspiracy, while saying there was actually lots of evidence of connection. And even some might say some evidence of collusion. but not to the level to establish a conspiracy. Which again, remember, we're talking about legal proof, which is in terms of criminal proof. You're talking about you have to be up to 90 to 95% of likelihood that you have established this crime properly, right? And then you're talking about a sitting president. And then, as I pointed out to Seth Abramson in my interview with him in, I believe it was probably late August or early September of 2020, that part of the problem here is that this is an intelligence operation that is obviously designed by really sophisticated intelligence networks from the Kremlin, probably one of, if not the most sophisticated, at the very least in terms of human intelligence, counterintelligence long-term groupings in the world, I would say. And they're often, I think they're actually disparaged by all these people who say that this was a conspiracy theory. You're basically not, these are the masters of chess for a long time. They had serious intelligence strategy during the Cold War and after. And then you throw in the Israelis into all of this. They're serious players in the intelligence game too. And so obviously this intelligence operation would be designed to be plausibly deniable. That's one of the main things that you do in terms of a covert operation, and where you're going to do something illegal under the guise of intelligence operations, as you design the operation to be plausibly deniable. You have red herrings, you have cutouts, you have firewalls of suspicion, and this is obviously what's going on here too.
Yeah, I was just thinking about something with the going back to I'd mentioned earlier the types of of media that is putting this particular story out. We talked about The Nation, which has this history with Stephen F. Cohen of this. Some people might say like PR for Russia, but at the very least, like the academic scholar who was advocating for better relations with Russia. We don't need to be an enemy. The dovishness towards Russia, while in the process of that, like leaving out like any type of critical discussion of like active measures, and we talked about in actual nefarious influence domestically and geopolitically that we've talked about that's gone on for a little while. But then also it's interesting, democracy now, I was just thinking about this, is that there's a bit of a similarity to, and it's not a perfect parallel, but I always remember how we talk about sometimes how Alex Jones, like people couldn't make sense of, like there are always these rumors of who Alex Jones served. Did he serve the Jesuit agenda? Did he serve the Zionist, the Jewish agenda? What was it? And like you couldn't make sense of it. And with Amy Goodman, it's interesting because there's people who think like she's an American imperial shill, or she runs cover for Israel, or she runs cover for Russia. And it's interesting, like the American people who think that like she's like a Russiagate propagator or promoter of anti-Russian talking points have made a lot of noise about her over the last couple of years, including her former employee Aaron Mate and people of that ilk like him and Max Blumenthal. But you see like that basically the way it goes is that like I think with someone like a Goodman, like there's elements of focus on each of these entities. We talk about the U.S., Israel, Russia, and one day there can be a report that's critical of U.S. Foreign policy overreach. Then the next day you could have something about Russia and Russia crimes in Ukraine. And then the next day there could be somebody from the Quincy Institute on to talk about how we need to de-escalate tensions with Russia. And then the day after that, there's somebody to come on to say that, well, here, Israel actually has this nefarious influence that the United States, or that Russia is said to have. Not long after somebody comes on to talk critically about like the elements of like how Trump is becoming like a fascist dictator in the mold of like, say, maybe a Vladimir Putin style authoritarian. So I kind of see all of these varying forces that all are all promoted. There's certain elements of each that are put out there, but then like there's never a full picture of like of each element of like of this puzzle, like the American element, the Russian element, the Israeli element, and how they could all come together, and also where they differentiate from each other. So I was just thinking about that with the regards of like this particular media through, say Democracy Now, and how it operates. You don't come away with, it's much different than Alex Jones, where you didn't really come away with a clear picture of anything, because it's obviously more credible and more serious. I'd say the reporting is more legitimate, of course, but you still come away with like a sense of like not quite knowing like where to begin or end with like where things go, or the depths of connectivity of things, and like the depths of how far things go in regards to all of these varying entities. I was just thinking about that.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you, Greg. That seems to be part of that. There's like the hand waving. That's the hand waving part of the obscurantism, I think, involved here. That's the effect it has. That's what it feels like. I agree. And so like, and so some of this is way more complex in terms of the narrative that's being spun, but some of it's very crude disinformation. I would call it some aspect of this disinformation. So, for example, I was pointing out that the Mueller report had these two sections, right? The first section about what's known as collusion, but was actually about a conspiracy to between Trump campaign and the Kremlin, right? And there was no clean bill given by even the Mueller report, as Bamford points out. Then, of course, the second half of it has to do with obstruction, about and I believe they laid out 10 the 10 incidents or avenues that would suggest that there was a case to be established for Trump or Trump administration or Trump campaign obstruction in relationship to the case. And Mueller gave no one a clean bill of health in terms of the way that Bamford's talking about it. And as we pointed out, over and over again, not only is it obvious that especially after Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, the eventual counsel to help the Israeli military intelligence NSO group and its Pegasus software after he got out of government, but Deputy Attorney General then, Rod Rosenstein, directly on paper limiting the scope of the Mueller investigation in relationship to Trump Russia, right? So, but in addition to that, it's obvious that there was a very strong sense of danger around fully explicating this Netanyahu and Israeli component of the 11/9 operation. But once again, what's still, I would say, front and center about very obviously being covered up around 11/9 is what I would then say, and hearkening back to my tripart conceptual framework of studying 9/11 as military intelligence and counterintelligence, in terms of 11/9, the military component of the 11/9 operation. And as we've had more information come out from even like Republican operative and Fox News whistleblowers like Sherry Jacobus, pointing directly at elements suggesting that the 2016 election, I would say in a military domestic component of making sure that targets are hit and elections are quote unquote won, has pointed out that these key states, there's key figures that are apparently involved in assuring the Trump victory beyond the prior information warfare and the Facebook and the psychometric and the psychographical warfare and all of that, but a hard line substratum of the target being reached that I would say is very similar to what we saw in something like most obviously the 2004 Bush-Kerry election, Ohio specifically in that case, but also a lot of suggestion that those same frameworks were being run in the 2000 election. So that, of course, is still missing. And while even just the information operation, the intelligence component of the 11/9 operation is both being further forensically disclosed while also obscuring the larger framework of it. at the exact same time. So now I'll even just include a link to the Time magazine breakdown on the Mueller report, myths breakdown, based on certain legal experts, where one myth is, quote, Mueller found, quote unquote, no collusion. Response: Mueller spent almost 200 pages describing, quote, numerous links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, unquote. There's way more. So it says, while Mueller was unable to establish a conspiracy between members of the Trump campaign and the Russians involved in this activity, he made it clear that, quote, a statement that the investigation did not establish particular facts does not mean there was no evidence of those facts, unquote. In fact, Mueller also wrote that the, quote, investigation established that the Russian government perceived it would benefit from a Trump presidency and worked to secure that outcome, and that the campaign expected it would benefit electorally from information stolen and released through Russian efforts, unquote. And so, and I'm just including the Time magazine as a perfect limited hangout aspect in relationship to this. But I would just then point out, Greg, that what you I think that we were talking about how Trump comes out after. Actually, we were listening to later portions of the Democracy Now! Interview with Bamford, and he points out that Trump comes out of a meeting that was apparently with Netanyahu in Trump Tower, and then says that he will do exactly as Netanyahu is asking in terms of making Jerusalem the capital and moving the embassy and all of that. And that reminds me of his public statement securing his interest in the support of this Israeli backer, similar to when he said, Russia, if you're listening, if you can find the emails and all of that. In a way, in an intelligence operation, to me, that those are Trump is signaling, making it publicly. He's doing a public buy-in in terms of some kind of larger scale omerta, while also then triggering the fullness of the operation.
I guess that was just trolling, and that's not at all noteworthy, though. I don't know. I mean, I guess we're not supposed to think too much about Russia. If you're listening, get the emails to us. I guess we're not supposed to think too much about that, but I think you're spot on about that.
All right. So let's get back to the Democracy Now! Transcript, and I'll just repeat this one section here. This is Bamford. Quote, they said that there was no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. All right. That's not what they said, right? Okay. So this is an issue here. All right. Back to Bamford. Quote, they left out a little bit from the report, and that there was collusion, but it was from Netanyahu and Israel to the Trump campaign. And it went on for months and months and involved providing the Trump campaign with secret access to the information that the Russians were picking up from Hillary Clinton's campaign and the DNC. In other words, the Israelis, they have a very, very sophisticated eavesdropping organization, Unit 8200. It's their equivalent of the NSA. And they were eavesdropping on the Russians and eavesdropping on Wikigate. And he repeats Wikigate over and over again. and Julian Assange, and they were picking up all this information that the Russians were getting from the Clinton campaign and the DNC. And rather than giving it to the president of the United States, to Obama, which is what an ally is supposed to do, especially one that gets $4 billion a year, they instead were giving it to the Trump campaign, secretly giving it to the Trump campaign in order to get concessions from Trump when he became president. And hopefully they were going to help make him president, unquote. And then it gets back into Amy Goodman. But I do want to point out that there is a substantial importance to Bamford's journalism here in terms of the establishing a conspiracy, right? Because as we pointed out before, that in relationship to reading from Chapter 4 of Proof of Conspiracy, how Trump's international collusion is threatening American democracy by Seth Abramson, that there is that you can establish this actual conspiracy between Roger Stone and Netanyahu, and we were pointing out that they know that this is illegal. This is why Roger Stone is so finicky, This is illegal under American law. So I would say that in so doing, Bamford is now very well exposing, with potential data that would suggest a conspiracy case that could be rolled out here, that there was a conspiracy established between Netanyahu and the Trump campaign in violation of American law. But this was known already too, to some extent. But Bamford's making a very good public case for, all right, this is a murky kind of thing with the Russian intelligence. We can't quite establish the conspiracy, but in terms of this, Netanyahu's right-hand man is texting with these key Trump campaign people and offering support that would be clearly seen as violating American law in terms of elections. So that's an interesting piece.
It's super interesting. And then it's just as like a slight tangential point to follow up on that. It's interesting that the intermediaries were seen as like these, it wasn't paleo neocons at Fox News. It wasn't even people at Breitbart, who Breitbart is the basically Israeli state media. I would think I think you argue that with made in America, conceived in Israel and all that. But it was Roger Stone who is making his post being removed from the Trump campaign all about building this quote unquote alternative media pipeline through Alex Jones, getting Trump on the Alex Jones show and things like that. And then Jerome Corsi, who is like considered like, it's not the right way to consider him, but considered like this fringe character who was involved in pushing conspiracy theories about John Kerry and writing for WorldNet Daily for a long time. That these were the intermediaries. I find that very interesting, and it shows like that just how that's one area where like people wouldn't pick up on that, because when you think about like the avenues, like, but in this lead up to 2016 and in this time when all this energy is going into the quote unquote alternative media with the change in like in media and stuff, and traditional media not being the only serious way to reach people anymore, that the intermediaries were through a guy who was directly building a relationship with InfoWars and a guy from WorldNet Daily, considered a fringe character with extremist conspiracy beliefs, who would then go on to become the Washington bureau chief for InfoWars. So, we say Alex Jones did 11/9 kind of as a joke, but like, really, is it too far off when you consider this element of that and the intermediaries there? Also, of course, Alex Jones and the Russian element. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, Alex Jones did do 11/9, dude. Alex Jones did 11/9. Put it on a shirt. I think it's fair. Or we could say InfoWars did 11/9. But Alex Jones did 11/9. All right, let's get back to this. Actually, the next section is all about what we've covered in terms of if people want to know about the intent of Netanyahu and Obama and Jerusalem and the Palestinians, and Netanyahu's very overt interest in Trump over Hillary Clinton in terms of 2016, they should probably actually just listen to our multiple episodes about that, especially our recent ones on Netanyahu's book itself. But they could also go back to our original show in 2021, I think, about Obama and Netanyahu. And then one thing I'll just point out quickly before we turn to wrap up here, and maybe what we'll do is just read from a few key pages of the end of Proof of Conspiracy to retie these elements that Bamford is outing, and retie it to the bigger 11/9 operation. Is the oh man, I lost my train of thought there. This is what happens when you sort of think out loud. This is one of the issues with the AnteDote, and I'm willing to admit my part in it. Is we do have these long drawn out sentences that sometimes don't get completed, because in a certain way what we're doing is we're thinking through, we're giving you our thoughts as we think through and analyze these issues as they come up.
If we were public figures, if we were politicians, we would not be accused. We could not be credibly accused of having scripted teleprompters to read off of.
No, that's And I'm not excusing myself for not being a little bit more concise and clarifying in terms of the way that I describe these kinds of things. And do want to work on that, and so I do intend to work on that. But at the same time, I want us to continue to share our thinking process, which is the way that we speak at some level. And there's something to that, because I believe that it's in the thinking process. If you're open to your thoughts as you analyze data, you can begin to then, fact check and further build out your analysis in relationship to, what's coherent and what's not, in many ways. So that's one piece. And there was a missing component of the background of Netanyahu in relationship to Trump that we were covering, that I was thinking about, but I forgot about it. Sorry.
Were we going back to what you mentioned as far as the period of the 1980s, or was it something different? Because we talked earlier when Netanyahu and Trump were in New York together, and then I remember you mentioned that. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to get to or not, because there's a lot of, that's a deep relationship, and there's a lot of layers to it. And I don't know, we know a lot about it, but like, as you said, like when we're thinking like this on the fly, like sometimes, you just, for me, like I have a million thoughts running through my mind at once. And sometimes like I lose my train of thought on one matter. And I think we're both kind of similar in that regard. But and we had brought up earlier go ahead.
Oh, I remember it, Greg. Thank you very much. It's the key missing. Here's another forensic piece that's missing that would really help out here. You might even consider it sort of like the retying in of this Bamford story on Netanyahu and Trump to Netanyahu and Putin, as we pointed out, that it's left dangling, both in terms of the media write-ups about this moment of Obama and Netanyahu, and Obama's push to resolve in some way the Israel-Palestine so-called conflict, that, as we read from, Netanyahu just leaves us dangling about. He obviously had major connections and talks with Putin about whether Putin could do something to stop this. And then Netanyahu basically just says it was successfully stopped. And we don't know what the inner dynamics of all of that were in terms of especially American politics and how that was all stood down. But it looks like it runs from Bibi to Putin.
And also, this was key to whatever's being left out here is key to, I think, ultimately what got Michael Flynn removed as a national security advisor with the inaugural open interference in foreign policy.
Definitely. All right, Greg, can we wrap this up for now by just reading from Proof of Conspiracy at the very end of the book?
Yes, that sounds good.
Okay, and we'll also include a link to my interview with Seth Abramson from 2020, late 2020, in terms of this whole realm in a much more expanded scope in terms of the actual 11/9 operation. And in it, you can hear Abramson actually hint at the specifics of the forensics of Roger Stone in relationship to, and I think he talks about Jerome Corsi too, in relationship to this Israeli Netanyahu component. And actually, I bring in things like Finkelstein and Birnbaum and all of that kind of stuff too. And Abramson explicates some of that. So I'd say a more comprehensive framework existed around this scenario in a 20-minute radio interview with Seth Abramson back almost 3 years ago now, than we actually see from Democracy Now! And James Bamford now. And then I would, once again, we'll include links to our episodes dealing with the Netanyahu-Obama, Israel-Palestine issues that are in the background of the 11/9 operation. All right. Now, here's a key missing figure who's not mentioned in Bamford's book, who would really help tie together the large portions of the Trump operation from an American context into the Middle East, primarily around Israel and the Palestinians, and then also then the UAE and the Saudis, and then back into the Kremlin. And so we're going to start on the bottom of page 485 of Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. So now some kind of liberal, author might want to, sort of liberal Zionist author might want to write a book about how Netanyahu's international collusion is threatening Israeli quote unquote democracy. So.
Or maybe David Rothkopf could take that up, or Aaron David Miller. I don't know.
There you go. Yeah. They could co-write it. That sounds good.
Well, it's going to be harder and harder for people to continue to for this to kind of flow under the radar, as we've talked about, because of just how much it's escalating. I'm not even sure what the media right now is, but it has to be covered at this point. It just can't be under the radar anymore. The whole thing that that quote about Israel and American neocons in Israel, they don't handle things in the public, they handle it in private. This has got to become a public conversation now with the escalation of what's taking place. So we'll see where it goes. But David Rothkopf, Aaron David Miller, Peter Beinart, somebody write that book.
There you go. And by the way, that very interesting narrative warfare coming from the Bibi network of defenders by once again putting his son Yair Netanyahu, the political ally and apparent buddy of everyone from Tucker Carlson to Andrew Meyer Amschel Anglin at the Daily, what's it called, the Daily Stormer or what?
Yeah, the Daily Stormer, and the guy who's next to Kevin Barrett on listings on Unz Review.
And who Kevin Barrett features his articles, Andrew Meyer Amschel Anglin from the Daily Stormer. It's sort of, he's just unabashed
a troll. He's just having fun trolling. That's all.
That they're using Yair Netanyahu front and center as a spokesperson for this that what's going on in Israel is only a deep state and an American deep state operation against Netanyahu, who's a champion for Israeli freedom, and the fake news and the corrupt judiciary are all being sponsored by the American deep state. Probably Obama's actually behind this in the basement of his mansion or something like that, and sprinkle in a little George Soros, and that's what's beginning to be pushed around the MAGA networks.
This is like an extension of what took place before. Remember, we always point out how Alex Jones said if they come, if Netanyahu goes down, they're coming for Trump. And this, in the way it's portrayed in these MAGA circles, is the same people are out to get Trump and Netanyahu. They're out to bring down the United States and Israel. And Russia could either be a villain in this or somewhat of a potential spiritual ally. But the deep state, the global deep state, is out to bring down both the U.S. and Israel, and Trump and Netanyahu as their champions of freedom.
And then if you bring in the whole remnants of the QAnon aspect, we're almost beginning to face an impenetrable cognitive dissonance moment in terms of Israel is last, but but the problem is it's Netanyahu who has to be sort of framed somewhat in relationship to MAGA as a sort of aligned MAGA file, as you pointed out, Greg? Or is this the precursor to then once the Israeli deep state's taken down, then after that, then the American deep state will be taken down? But no, it's the American deep state who's orchestrating this. It's George Soros and Obama who are orchestrating this against the MAGA file Netanyahu. So you very quickly get into a sort of a cognitive dissonance, a logical absurdity of sort of impenetrable proportions, I think.
And or the Trump MAGA Q patriots are taking down all of these networks simultaneously.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up. Bottom of page 485 of Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. Quote, perhaps unsurprising given the Emiratis' presence there, a ubiquitous figure in the Trump MBZ, that's Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, alliance has intermittently appeared in Yemen. Mohammed Dalan, the security advisor to MBZ, who, during the Saudi-Yemeni war, is acting as both the Emirati prince's conduit to Putin and his in-theater assassination squad coordinator. unquote. By the way, you would think that like the 11/9 denialists in the libertarian sets who I believe principally have been against the war on Yemen and American support for it, and who I believe in good faith want to bring it to an end, you would think that they would be interested in this figure in terms of how crucial he is wrapped up in all of this, in the Middle Eastern dynamics of it. And as you'll see, he connects a lot of these dots too. He connects the network. All right. Back to page 485 into 486 of Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson. Quote, Mohammed Dalan, the security advisor to MBZ, who during the Saudi-Yemeni war is acting as both the Emirati prince's conduit to Putin and his in-theater assassination squad coordinator. While Dalan has for some time been operating a hit squad in Yemen that uses Israeli spyware, toward the end of 2018, additional focus is placed on the shadowy Gulf state operator, in part because of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. In late 2018, Yeni Safak, a Turkish newspaper, alleges that it was Dalan's, quote, cover-up team from Lebanon, unquote, that went to Istanbul shortly after Khashoggi's murder to, quote, help hide traces, unquote, of the gruesome execution. Given Dalan's past meeting with Trump envoy Eric Prince in the Seychelles in January 2017, a meeting Prince hid from Congress while under oath, the infamous Palestinians' involvement in the highest-profile murder of an American in 2018 would, no matter its extent, be politically problematic for the Trump administration. Yeni Safak alleges that Dalan, quote-unquote, dispatched one of the two crews tasked with covering up Khashoggi's kidnapping, torture, dismemberment, assassination, dissolution, and incineration. According to the Turkish media outlet, Dalan's team spent 3 nights in Istanbul and was captured on surveillance footage seized by the Turkish government in the wake of Khashoggi's disappearance. The Middle East Monitor not only re-reports the Yeni Safak story, but notes that Dalan's team, quote, used fake passports to travel and carried tools and chemicals, unquote. The UAE, through its Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, will accuse Yeni Safak of making up the story that Dalan was involved in Khashoggi's murder, an allegation that Dalan himself also denies. Though how convincingly, given his other activities in the Middle East, is another matter. According to Jordanian news outlet Al Bawaba, by November 2018, Dalan has earned the nickname, quote-unquote, the hitman and, quote-unquote, the strongman for his years of work on behalf of MBZ. The Jordanian journalist, in reporting the Yeni Safak article on Dalan's alleged assassination squad in Istanbul, a significant fact given Jordan's uneasy alliance with the Saudis and Emiratis, in contrast to Turkey's top-line hostility to both, further accused Dalan of, quote, spying for Israel, unquote, and orchestrating assassinations in countries other than Yemen, including Jordan. Al-Bawaba also closes the circle between two Red Sea conspirators, MBZ and El-Sisi, by accusing Dalan of being, quote, involved in forming a counter-revolutionary movement supported by the UAE to curb the consequences of the 2011 Egyptian revolution, unquote, in a way that made substantially more likely the nation's 2013 military coup in which El-Sisi participated as Minister of Defense, and El-Sisi's subsequent mid-2014 quote-unquote election with 97% of the vote as Egypt's president. If all of these allegations are true, Dalan not only was involved in Jamal Khashoggi's murder as an accessory alongside one Red Sea conspirator, MBS, but works for another conspirator, MBZ, helped put a third conspirator into power, El-Sisi, is MBZ's chief conduit to an out-of-region co-conspirator, Putin, and is both accused of spying for and using the spyware of a military run by yet another co-conspirator, Netanyahu. Dalan's meeting in the Seychelles in January 2017, a meeting at least 2 Trump advisors, Eric Prince and George Nader, attended, with the apparent knowledge of Steve Bannon, Jared Kushner, and Michael Flynn, could thus be seen as a meeting of agents of the Red Sea conspiracy nations. Given that the event was also attended by a top Kremlin agent and the head of the Emiratis' security services, that the UAE, Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, with the assent of Saudi Arabia, if history is any guide, also sought to put Dahlan in charge of the Palestinian Authority in spring 2016, only underscores the Palestinian exile's seeming centrality to the Red Sea conspiracy. Throughout the atrocities in Yemen and Istanbul, writes The Atlantic, quote, Saudi and Emirati leaders have been emboldened by the Trump administration's unconditional support, unquote. The Saudis receiving this level of support for such a brutal course of conduct would be not just improbable, but politically impossible were MBS not such close friends with both Jared Kushner and his father-in-law, and would be unlikely to be a political risk worth taking for either Trump or Kushner if they had not received substantial benefit from the Saudis and their allies in turn. As The Atlantic concludes, quote, Trump has shown little sign of pressuring his Saudi and Emirati allies, least of all over Yemen. The only realistic check left is in Congress, where more voices are asking why the world's most powerful country is helping to perpetuate the world's worst humanitarian crisis, unquote.
That's very important. And a couple things out of that is, imagine if this Dahlan had been installed as the head of the Palestinian Authority. I can just imagine the repercussions of that. And then also, this is the once again, importance of getting the complete picture together. And as much as we talk about Russia, and let's talk about Israel here, and we've talked, and I mean, we understand this. I mean, here at the AnteDote, I'm increasingly understanding this, but much as it took a while to really pick up on Russia, it took a while to pick up on the United Arab Emirates as opposed to just Saudi Arabia. And so it's another part of the full picture that like we're missing here is the UAE, and in this case, some of these people that might work on in somewhat of a multinational behalf there. But this Emirati angle is crucial, and it doesn't get nearly as much attention as the boy prince Mohammed bin Salman does.
No, and then the tie-ins with Eric Prince and all of that, and Dahlan being speaking Russian and Hebrew, I believe, and being accused of being a spy for Israel by Palestinian solidarity networks, really, in the surrounding region, and then being this apparent tied together operative of all of this, I think is crucial, and it's that kind of connective tissue that's based on forensics. Some of it's controversial, not necessarily totally proven out, but the larger scope of this, at the very least, I would say, has been proven out. And that's why we need to use these further revelations by Bamford to actually build out an honest and truthful analysis of what's continues to go on, especially in relationship here in the United States in terms of our politics, and then internationally in terms of all what's going on in terms of Russia, Ukraine, and Israel, Palestine, and beyond. So.
Absolutely right. And I think we're going to leave it there, Jeremy, unless you have any other final thoughts. Thank you.
No, that's it. Thank you very much, Greg. And thank you, everybody out there rocking with us. We appreciate you. And until next time, AnteDote, we are out.